Hello, I'm Diana Mellon Lacey, and I'm going to speak about my project, which is a study of the Danza de los Voladores, or Dance of the Flyers. The Danza de los Voladores is a dance that's an ancient ritual of Mesoamerica, and varying forms of the dance are described among a variety of indigenous peoples of the region, and they include Totonacs, Huastecs, Tepuas, Nahuas, and Otones. Here's a map of Mesoamerica if you need a little geographic refreshing. And you can see it goes from Mexico down into Guatemala. So the dance was practiced throughout that region. And envisioning the dance, the best way to understand it and actually see it is to view it. I have included a link for a YouTube video of a performance of the dance, and you can look at that at your leisure. So the purpose of this study, the Danza de los Voladores, is one way that we can learn about the glorious past of the indigenous peoples of Mexico and Central America. They have a very rich cultural and spiritual history. An arts-based research approach to this study is imminent because this is a performance. Ritual basically is a performance in most instances, and this is quite a dramatic performance. So viewing the danza clarifies its inherent artistic and theatrical imaging of ancient beliefs that's reenacted through the ritual. And the drawing that you see is one that was made during the conquest period, a very romanticized version that depicts the voladores as birds flying from the scaffolding. And I think it's quite a romantic interpretation. So I just present a little bit about the theoretical approach to this study. Considering myth, Kripal defined a myth as a sacred story that founds and grounds a particular world. And pre-Hispanic creation myths of Mesoamerica are extant, but it's not known with certainty as the conquest of the Spanish and Christianity largely obliterated the culture. And the descriptions may be biased because they're usually composed by Spanish explorers and missionaries. There are some written sources, such as the Popol Vuh of the Quiche of Western Guatemala, which is a chronicle of the cycles of creation written by a Quiche scribe in Latin in the mid-1500s. Ritual is defined by Kripal as the reenactment of the myth that makes the world come into being. So again, this is viewed as a creation myth. And it's achieved by scripted and repeated actions which take place in a special space and time. Myth and its reenactment constitute an arts-based approach to the major issues of life. They're dramatic. They generally involve a portrayal of difficulty or challenge and ways of overcoming it in a highly stylized manner. So Kripal also wrote that if myth is the story of religion, then ritual is its theater. And the languages through which a group communicates itself to itself include gestures, music, dancing, graphic representation, painting, sculpture, and symbolic objects. And this is an observation made by the anthropologist Victor Turner, who has done extensive research on ritual practices and ritual practices as drama and theater in a variety of cultures, including some in Mexico. So the selection of my topic itself was based on an arts-based research method, and I utilized intuitive inquiry. So I'd like to just talk a little bit about that. Anderson and Broad in 2013 defined intuitive inquiry as a method that affirms intuition, compassion, and service as central to research and to understanding anything that's important in a culture. And the method involves what Anderson and Broad called a hermeneutic circle. It invites the transformation of the researcher's understanding of the topic, procedurally contained by 5 successive cycles of interpretation, and it's described as highly intuitive, I guess hence the name. So the first cycle is clarifying the research topic through imaginal dialogue. And that's what I engaged in. Anderson and Broad described the use of photographs, texts, movies, and recorded dreams as prompts for this methodological step. And I used what Anderson and Broad describe as an unconscious process. I relaxed and thought about my selected topic, and I called upon my ancestors to guide me. And I feel like my ancestors on my patrilineal side, who are from the Mesoamerican region, are always responsive to my requests. So, in doing this, I experienced a sort of dreamlike state, and I heard soft tones of a flute, bird-like timbre, and jungle or lush tropical images. And I wrote a poem as a consequence of that, and then subsequently in another session of this intuitive process experienced a clarity that I needed to do this project looking at the Danza de los Voladores, and particularly its connection to the birds and the aviary that's been my sort of theme throughout this course. So that was very important to me in this course as a method. So the meaning of the Danza de los Voladores, it's uncertain, again, due to cultural decimation, but it is associated with ritual sacrifice, which was a salient part of Aztec religion. Also with fertility and with influencing the weather. And another feature is that the Danza de los Voladores was declared an intangible cultural heritage in Mexico by UNESCO in 2009. And here we see the Cultura Totonaca, a very stylized artistic picture of a voladore. So my research question is, what is the meaning of the Danza de los Voladores to its modern day practitioners? And these pictures show a supplicant to one of the bird deities, bird god deities. We also see at the bottom a really beautiful photo of Quetzal, which was a sacred bird, and you see its extraordinarily long flowing tail feathers, which it develops during the mating season, and then the stylized drawing or painting of Voladore, the one that stands at the top of the scaffolding playing the flute, whose cap with a little plume on it, and then the trailing streamers seems to be mimicking the Quetzal. So the role of the researcher, I considered an anthropological approach. 2 important constructs for me that are common in cross-cultural work are emic and etic. The emic approach being an insider's view, the etic approach being the perspective of an outsider, with questions posed as those of an outsider. And while an emic view is often extremely rich because of the close cultural context of the person doing the study, it's also threatened by bias. So according to Kripal, if you're in the position of an outsider, you regard things as a myth, and if you're an insider, you view it as being the way things are. So the methods that I will use will be comprised, my sample will be comprised of indigenous practitioners of the Danza de los Voladores, and I will believe that recruitment can be facilitated through the established indigenous training programs that now exist as a result of the UNESCO award, and the sites and specific populations will be determined. A study type and data collection, it's going to be a qualitative study using arts-based research methods. Specific methods will be grounded theory, narrative research, phenomenology, and intuitive inquiry. and I will focus on individual participant interviews to understand the position of the participants, as well as using autoethnographic methods to capture the researcher's phenomenological experience. The arts-based research methods that I will utilize will be pictorial art, pageantry of the event, including costumes, music, liturgy, iconography, symbology, relationship to sacred birds such as the quetzal pictured below. And to analyze the data, I will code narrative data for themes and utilize an iterative process to verify meaning and understanding. And the arts-based research data analysis, I'll obtain the data using videographic and audio recording resources. Interpretation of symbolic meaning will be an included component of individual participants' interviews. Anticipated results, I believe the interpretation of the ritual will vary by indigenous tribal group and by duration as a participant in the ritual dance, and that modern innovations to the ritual will yield new interpretations and the opportunity for transformative experiences for both participants and observers of the ritual. And examples of this, new forms to the ritual resulting from the UNESCO designation, the influence of performing the danza for a tourist audience, focused on the secular versus the sacred, the introduction of women as voladores who were previously prohibited from assuming this role, and the significance. I believe the study will be important to indigenous populations of Mexico and Central America who practice this dance, anthropologists, sociologists, and folklorists interested in Mesoamerican culture, and the tourist industry, as this has now become a to some extent commodity to attract tourists. And finally, those interested in the transformative and evolving meaning that preserves myth and ritual in a culture. So to conclude, I'd just like to review the character of ritual as defined by famous sociologist Emil Durkheim. Rituals are defined by reference to a non-ordinary domain of experience, the sacred, embedded in social and moral bonds, and rituals are based on collective representations which in turn reflect the cognitive foundations of both religious and logical scientific thought, and that these two are not mutually exclusive since they are both social practices. Rituals are not the mere application of illusory pseudo-theories, but are rather enacted through actions, and their efficacy in shaping moral relationships flows directly from the coordinated gestures of the performers, including bodies and material culture. So I follow here with the references that I used, and I thank you very much for your attention to my presentation.